What if saving a life meant losing your own freedom, but finding something worth fighting for? For Ruth Robbins, a 24-year-old art curator, it was just another Thursday. The gallery smelled of turpentine and old canvas, the soft hum of overhead lights her only companion as she locked up for the night. She'd built her life around predictability, quiet mornings cataloging Renaissance sketches, late evenings walking home under Verona City's streetlights. It was a small life, a safe one, the kind she'd carefully constructed after watching too many people in her family chase chaos and lose themselves in it. That Thursday, the rain came harder than usual. The marble steps outside the Verona Museum of Contemporary Art glistened under the yellow glow of the street lamps. Ruth tucked her portfolio under her arm and descended carefully, her heels clicking against wet stone. Then the world exploded. The sound came first, a sickening screech of tires, the violent crunch of metal on metal. Two cars collided at the intersection ahead, one careening into a parked vehicle. Glass spiraled through the air like deadly confetti. Then came the fire. Flames erupted from the hood, orange and hungry, painting the rain-soaked street in flickering hellfire. Ruth froze, her breath caught in her throat. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, but her feet wouldn't move. That's when she saw him. A man emerged from the burning wreckage, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit despite the rain and soot. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw tight, and even from 20 feet away, Ruth could see the cold precision in his movements. He wasn't panicking, he wasn't running, he was assessing. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. His were dark, unreadable, framed by shadows and the faint hint of ink that snaked up from beneath his collar. There was something ancient in those eyes, something that had seen too much. Then the shadow moved. A figure burst from the darkness, knife glinting in the firelight. The attacker was fast practiced, brutal, lunging toward the man with deadly intent. The blade arced downward, aimed directly at his chest. Ruth's mind went blank. No thoughts, no logic, just a single, primal instinct. Not again. Not like this. She didn't think. She just ran. Her heels slipped on the wet pavement, her portfolio tumbling from her hands. She covered the distance in seconds and threw herself between them, shoving the stranger backward with all her strength. The knife found her instead. Pain erupted across her abdomen, white-hot and blinding. The world tilted. Her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The man's face hovered above hers, his expression frozen between shock and fury. His hand pressed against the wound, warm and firm, trying to stem the blood. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. Gunfire erupted. Sharp cracks echoed off the museum's stone walls. Screaming, sirens wailing in the distance. The last thing Ruth saw before darkness claimed her was the tattoo on his wrist, a coil of thorns wrapping around a single blood-red rose. And then, nothing. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. When she woke, the world was silent. No sirens, no rain, no fire. Just the soft rustle of silk sheets against her skin, the faint hum of air conditioning, and the unsettling glow of a security camera's red light blinking in the corner of an unfamiliar ceiling. Her side throbbed with each breath, bandaged but still screaming. The room around her was vast floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, modern furniture that cost more than her annual salary, and absolute, suffocating quiet. She tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her abdomen. A door opened across the room. He stepped in. The man from the street, the stranger she'd saved. He looked different now, cleaned up, his suit replaced with a crisp white shirt rolled to his elbows, revealing those tattoos that climbed his forearms like dark vines. He moved with the grace of a predator. His eyes, those whiskey-dark eyes, fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and measured. "Good, we need to talk." Ruth's throat was dry. "Where am I? Who are you?" He stepped closer, and in the morning, light streaming through the windows, she saw it clearly now, the ink on his skin, the hardness in his jaw, the weight of violence that clung to him like cologne. "My name is Michael Genovese," he said quietly, "and you just saved the wrong man's life." Ruth Robbins had always believed in two things: that art could capture truth, and that kindness cost nothing. She'd lived her entire life by those principles, raised by a mother who taught her that compassion was the highest form of courage. But as she lay in that stranger's bed, staring at the man whose life she'd saved, she realized how dangerously naive she'd been. Kindness, she was about to learn, could cost everything. The silence in the room felt heavier than the pain in her side. Michael Genovese stood near the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, watching the woman who'd disrupted his carefully ordered world. She looked fragile against the white silk sheets, too fragile for what was coming. He'd seen men twice her size crumble under less pressure. Yet she'd thrown herself in front of a blade without hesitation. Foolish, he thought. Brave but foolish. Ruth's pulse hammered in her ears as consciousness fully returned. The room swam into focus, golden chandeliers, pristine walls, expensive furniture that belonged in magazines, not hospitals. Panic clawed at her chest. Where were the monitors? The nurses? The sterile hospital smell? "You're safe now," Michael said, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. The words were meant to comfort, but even he knew they were hollow. Safety was relative in his world. She wasn't safe, she was contained. There was a difference, though he doubted she'd appreciate the distinction yet. Ruth shifted against the pillows, wincing. Safe from what? He turned to face her, measuring how much truth she could handle. Not much, he decided. She still had that civilian softness, that belief that the world operated on logic and fairness. He'd lost that belief at 14, watching his father's car explode outside their family estate. "From the men who tried to kill me," he said simply. "Why would they come after me?" Her voice cracked with genuine confusion. "I'm nobody. Nobody." The word twisted something in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation he quickly buried. She had no idea what she'd become the moment she'd stepped between him and that blade. In his world, debts were currency, and he now owed her one he could never repay. Worse, his enemies knew it. "You became somebody the moment you stepped in front of that blade." He moved closer, watching her eyes widen. "They saw you save me. That makes you leverage." The word landed exactly as he'd intended. Cold, clinical, undeniable. Ruth scanned the room with new eyes, and he watched her mind work, cataloging details. She was observant, this one. She'd spotted the cameras within seconds. Most civilians never noticed them at all. "This isn't a hospital," she said slowly. "No." Michael kept his hands in his pockets, a deliberate gesture of non-aggression. Everything about his posture was calculated close enough to demonstrate control, far enough to avoid triggering her flight response. Hospitals ask questions. Questions lead to police. Police complicate things. Complicate what? He didn't answer. Couldn't, really. How did you explain to someone like her that police in Verona were either bought, buried, or too smart to interfere? Instead, he gestured toward the window. "Come. You should see where you are." Ruth wanted to refuse. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the sheets. But curiosity won, as he'd known it would. She was an art curator. Observation was her nature. She pushed herself upright, and Michael's hand twitched involuntarily toward her. He caught himself. Control, he reminded himself. She needed to believe she had choices, even though they both knew she had none. She shuffled toward the glass, and he maintained his distance, close enough to catch her if she fell. The instinct surprised him. He'd stopped catching people years ago. The view stole her breath, he could tell by the way she froze. One hand pressed against the glass. Verona sprawled beneath them like a kingdom, and in a way, it was his. Every street corner had a story, every shadow held one of his men, every building concealed some piece of his empire. "Where am I?" she whispered. "My home." His reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. Up close, he could see the exhaustion bruising the skin beneath her eyes, the way pain had carved temporary lines around her mouth. She was beautiful in that fragile, temporary way of civilians untouched by the violence that had sculpted him into something harder. "Until it's safe for you to leave." "And when will that be?" "When I say so." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Ruth spun to face him, anger flaring past fear, and something in his chest shifted again. She had fire beneath that softness. Good. She'd need it. "You can't just keep me here. I have a life, a job, friends." "Had?" he corrected, hating the necessity of it. Ruth Robbins was stabbed in a random street attack and is currently recovering in an undisclosed private facility. Your employer has been notified. Your apartment is being monitored. Your life, as you knew it, is paused. You have no right. "I have every right." Something cold threaded through his voice, the same tone he used in boardrooms and interrogations. "You saved my life. Now I'm saving yours, whether you like it or not." They stood locked in silent confrontation. Michael saw her searching his face for humanity and wondered what she found. Most people saw only the monster, but Ruth's gaze lingered on his tattoos, the scar near his jaw, the brief softening in his eyes when they dropped to her bandaged torso. She was seeing too much. That made her dangerous to herself, and to him. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice breaking. "Neither did I." The admission escaped before he could stop it, genuine regret surfacing. She'd ruined everything by saving him his carefully maintained distance, his absolute control, his ironclad rule about debts. But here we are. That night, Ruth's dreams dragged her back to the fire, the explosion, the blade, the stranger's dark eyes. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat, her wound throbbing with her pulse, and froze. Michael sat in the shadows near the window, watching her. He'd been there for hours, unable to shake the unfamiliar weight of responsibility. She was his burden now, this woman who'd disrupted decades of discipline with one selfless act. He didn't know whether to admire her or resent her. Their eyes met across the darkness. He should leave, should maintain the distance. But something rooted him to that chair, some fundamental shift in the universe he didn't understand. Finally, he stood, his movements silent, despite his size. At the door he paused. "Sleep, Ruth. You're safe here." The lie tasted bitter. She wasn't safe. She'd never be safe again. But as he closed the door and walked the shadowed halls of his fortress, Michael Genovese made a decision that would reshape everything. He would keep her alive, no matter the cost, even if it destroyed him in the process. 3 days passed like water through closed fingers. Ruth's wound was healing, but her understanding of where she truly was had only deepened into something darker. The penthouse revealed itself slowly, a fortress disguised as luxury. Locked doors that required fingerprint access. Hallways patrolled by men in dark suits who nodded at Michael but never met her eyes. A private doctor who visited twice daily, checking her vitals with clinical efficiency and speaking only when necessary. "Healing well," he'd said that morning, his voice flat. Another week, perhaps. Another week in this beautiful prison. Michael watched her from the doorway as the doctor left, noting the way she'd started testing boundaries. Yesterday she'd tried 3 different doors. Today she'd asked the doctor his name. She was cataloging her captivity, searching for weaknesses. Smart. It's what he would have done. It also made her dangerous to herself most of all. "You're restless," he observed. Ruth turned from the window where she'd been staring at the city below, so close yet impossibly far. "Wouldn't you be?" "Yes," he thought. "I've been restless for 20 years. But he only shrugged. "You're welcome to explore. Within reason." He left before she could ask what "within reason" meant. Better she discovers the boundaries herself. She'd respect them more that way. Ruth waited until his footsteps faded before moving. The penthouse was vast, too vast for one man, she thought. Most of it was sterile in its perfection. Minimalist furniture, polished surfaces, nothing personal except the weight of money. It felt like a showroom, not a home. Masculine, cold, lonely. Some part of her whispered. She turned a corner and found a hallway she hadn't explored. At its end, a door stood slightly ajar, the only one that wasn't locked or guarded. Curiosity pulled her forward, her bare feet silent on marble floors. The study. It was different immediately. Lived in. The scent of old leather and aged whiskey filled the air. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, real books, not decorative spines. Classics, philosophy, military strategy. A mahogany desk sat near the window, papers stacked with meticulous precision. A bar cart in the corner held crystal decanters catching afternoon light. And photographs, several frames on a side table. Ruth moved closer. The largest showed Michael younger, maybe mid-20s, standing beside an older man with silver hair and the same dark, calculating eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable. Father and son. Both wore suits. Both carried the same dangerous grace. In the photo, Michael's expression was harder, sharper, as though something vital had been carved out of him since. "Don Genovese," a voice said from behind her. Ruth spun, heart hammering. Michael stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He'd known she'd come here, had perhaps left the door open deliberately, testing her curiosity the same way she was testing his boundaries. They were circling each other, predator and prey, though neither was certain anymore which role they played. "Your father," she said, not a question. "Was," Michael entered the room, his presence filling it immediately. He died 9 years ago. Car bomb. The casual brutality of it stole her breath. Michael reached for one of the decanters, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid. He didn't offer her any, she was still on pain medication. Small mercy, that restraint. "I'm sorry," Ruth said quietly. He swirled the glass, staring into it as though it held answers. "Don't be." He knew the risks. As do I, Michael thought. As will you. Soon enough. The weight of his father's legacy pressed against his shoulders, the empire built on blood and loyalty, now his to maintain. Ruth Robbins was a complication his father would have eliminated immediately. Clean, efficient, final. But Michael wasn't his father. That realization troubled him more than he'd admit. Ruth was about to speak when voices drifted from the hallway low, urgent. "The Merino Syndicate struck again. 3 of our distribution points hit last night." "And Vince?" Another voice, gruff. "Any confirmation he leaked the route?" "Not yet, but the boss wants him watched." The words carved ice through Ruth's veins. Syndicate, distribution, boss. She turned to Michael, whose expression had shuttered completely. "What are you?" she whispered. Michael set down his glass with careful precision. He'd known this moment would come when her naivety shattered against reality. Part of him had hoped to delay it. Another part, darker and more honest, wanted her to see, to understand what she'd entangled herself with. "What do you think I am?" He moved closer, and Ruth held her ground despite every instinct to screaming retreat. "Not a businessman." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "People don't try to kill businessmen with knives in the street." "Smart girl." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "So, ask your real question." Ruth's hands clenched at her sides. She thought of the locked doors, the silent guards, the way men moved around Michael like satellites orbiting something powerful and destructive. She thought of the doctor who never asked her name, the cameras watching her every movement, the expensive prison masquerading as protection. Why do people want you dead? The question hung between them, heavy with consequences neither could take back. Michael studied her, this woman who'd saved him, who now stood in his study surrounded by the evidence of his world, still searching for something human beneath the monster. He could lie, should lie, send her back to that bedroom with comfortable delusions intact. Instead, he told her the truth, because power always creates enemies. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the old scar tissue beneath his collar. "And I have more power than most." Understanding crashed over Ruth like cold water. The wealth, the guards, the fortress, the way men spoke his name in whispers. She'd saved a mafia boss. Their eyes locked, the space between them crackling with something more dangerous than fear recognition. She saw what he was, he saw that she saw, and neither of them looked away. "You should rest," Michael said finally, his voice rougher than intended. But as Ruth left his study on unsteady legs, both of them knew something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer just his captive. She was his secret, and secrets in Michael Geneviese's world had a way of becoming weapons. Ruth learned the truth about Michael Genovese on a Tuesday evening, when Violence wore a 3-piece suit. She'd been reading in the sitting room a book she'd found in his study about Renaissance art, when raised voices echoed from down the hall. Not arguing. Worse. One voice calm and surgical, the other pleading. Against her better judgment, Ruth moved toward the sound. Michael stood in the marble foyer, his back to her, facing a man who dropped to his knees. 2 guards flanked them, stone-faced. The kneeling man was younger, maybe 30, his expensive shirt soaked with sweat. "I didn't know, Mr. Genevese. I swear the shipment, I thought." "You thought?" Michael's voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded storms. "Tell me, Marco, when did I hire you to think?" From where she stood hidden in the doorway, Ruth watched Michael's shoulders perfectly squared, unnaturally still. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been safer. This was something colder, more absolute. Judgment. Michael knew Ruth was watching. He'd heard her bare feet on marble, caught her reflection in the window glass. Part of him wanted to shield her from this, the part that remembered who he'd been before his father's death carved humanity out of him. But another part, darker and more honest, needed her to see. To understand that the man who'd bandaged her wounds was the same man who'd killed 17 people by his own hand. She needed to know what she'd saved. "You cost me $2 million and 3 good men." Michael crouched, bringing himself eye level with Marco. "Explain to me why I shouldn't let Dante take you to the river." The threat landed with surgical precision. Marco's face drained of color. Please, I have a family, a daughter. Everyone has someone. Michael's voice carried no mercy, no warmth. This was Don Genovese's son, the man who'd inherited an empire at 29 and held it through blood. That's why loyalty matters. That's why thinking is dangerous. Ruth's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. This wasn't the man who'd caught her when she fell, who'd pressed his hand to her wound with something like desperation. This was someone else entirely, something forged in violence and survival. Michael heard her small sound, felt it like a blade between his ribs. You have 48 hours, he said, standing. Recover my money, identify who leaked the route, or don't come back. Marco scrambled to his feet, nodding frantically, and fled. The guards dispersed. Michael remained motionless, staring at the spot where Marco had knelt. He could feel Ruth's horror like a physical presence behind him, and something in his chest twisted an organ he'd thought had atrophied years ago. Shame. He turned slowly. Their eyes met across the foyer. Ruth didn't run, didn't speak, just stared at him with those hazel eyes that saw too much, understood too little. Go back to your room, Michael said, the command gentler than intended. She went. Hours later, Michael stood outside her door, warring with himself. He should leave her alone, should maintain the distance between monster and innocent. But his knuckles were already knocking, his control already fracturing around this woman who'd disrupted 20 years of careful detachment. Come in, her voice called, small and wary. Ruth sat propped against pillows, the book abandoned beside her. She'd been crying. He could see the redness around her eyes, the way she'd scrubbed at her cheeks. The sight of it carved something hollow in his chest. I came to check your wound, he said, though they both knew it was a lie. She didn't call him on it, simply lifted the edge of her shirt, revealing the bandage. Michael sat on the edge of the bed carefully, maintaining distance, and peeled back the gauze with practiced hands. His father had taught him field medicine young, necessary when hospitals asked questions. The wound was healing cleanly. Small mercy. I'm sorry, he said quietly, the words foreign on his tongue. For earlier, you didn't deserve to see that. But it's who you are, not an accusation, an observation. Michael's hand stilled. Yes. Ruth studied him in the lamplight, the sharp lines of his face, the tattoos climbing his forearms like dark vines, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. The tattoos, she said softly. What are they? He shouldn't tell her, shouldn't offer pieces of himself to someone who'd only see more reasons to fear him. But her eyes held something besides terror, curiosity. Yes, but also a strange, impossible compassion. Reminders, he said finally. Each one marks a life I took, a mistake I made, choices that can't be unmade. Michael rolled up his sleeve, revealing the full canvas of ink. Ruth leaned closer, her breath catching as she traced the designs with her eyes, thorns, daggers, dates in Roman numerals, names in languages she didn't recognize. A chronicle of violence written on skin. Then she saw it. Over his heart, partially hidden by his shirt, a single rose, blood red and perfect. And that one? She whispered. Michael's jaw tightened. This was the wound that never healed, the ghost that haunted his empty penthouse. Her name was Sophia. My father arranged our engagement when I was 26. She was kind, gentle, everything I wasn't. Ruth heard the past tense, understood its weight. What happened? She got caught in the war. His voice fractured just barely. A car bomb meant for me. She was picking up my dry cleaning. He looked away, unable to meet Ruth's eyes. The rose is all I have left, a reminder that people who get close to me die. The confession hung between them, raw and bleeding. Ruth should have recoiled. Should have seen the warning for what it was, a man telling her to run while she still could. Instead, her hand moved of its own accord, fingertips brushing the rose tattoo through his shirt. Michael's breath caught. The touch was feather-light, but it burned through layers of armor he'd spent years constructing. No one had touched him with gentleness in so long he'd forgotten how it felt like being flayed alive. You checked my wound every day, Ruth said softly. You caught me when I fell. You told me I was safe. Her eyes found his, clear and devastating. The man who killed for power is the same man who bandaged a stranger's wound. How do I reconcile that? You don't, Michael thought. You save yourself and forget you ever met me. But what he said was, I don't know. They sat in the lamplight, the city breathing beyond the windows, two people caught in the impossible space between violence and tenderness. Ruth saw the killer and the guardian. Michael saw his damnation wearing a curator's gentle hands. and neither could look away. Ruth began noticing the patterns on the 6th day of her captivity. Phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered a room. Conversations conducted in Italian, too rapid for her limited understanding but heavy with tension. Documents left on Michael's desk always face down, always encrypted with symbols she couldn't decipher, and names, repeated like a liturgy. Vince, Marino, the docks. Tuesday. Something was fracturing beneath the surface of Michael's controlled world, and Ruth felt it like tremors before an earthquake. Michael noticed her noticing. He saw the way her eyes tracked him during phone calls, how she'd grown quiet and observant, cataloging details the way she once cataloged brushstrokes in paintings. It unnerved him. Not because she was learning too much, though she was, but because her curiosity meant she cared. Caring in his world was a death sentence. He should have sent her away the moment her wound healed enough, should have given her a new identity and disappeared her into safety. But every time he planned the conversation, he found reasons to delay. One more day, until the Marino threat is neutralized, until Vince's loyalty is confirmed. Lies, all of them. The truth was simpler and more damning. He didn't want her to leave. That made her the most dangerous person in his life. The opportunity came on a Tuesday night, when lightning split the sky and Michael left for an emergency meeting. "Stay in your room," he'd ordered, his voice tight with tension. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Ruth had nodded, compliant, obedient. She waited 30 minutes after his departure, counting her heartbeats, before slipping into the hallway. The office was forbidden territory, the one room Michael had explicitly warned her never to enter, which meant it held exactly what she needed: answers. The door was locked, but Ruth had watched the security codes long enough to memorize the pattern: 6 digits. Michael's father's death date. The lock clicked open. Moonlight and lightning illuminated the space in stark flashes. Ruth moved quickly, her hands trembling as she rifled through papers on his desk. Shipping manifests. Financial statements in coded columns. A photograph of Michael with a group of men all wearing the same expression of calculated danger. Then she found it. A letter, handwritten, tucked beneath a leather portfolio. Michael. The leak confirmed. Vince has been feeding route information to the Marino family for 3 months. Evidence attached. He knows about the girl. Recommend immediate action before he uses her as leverage. Dante. The words blurred as Ruth's pulse roared in her ears. He knows about the girl. Her. They were talking about her. Someone named Vince, someone within Michael's inner circle, had betrayed him. Was using her as a pawn in a war she'd stumbled into by accident. "I warned you." Ruth spun, the letter falling from her hands. Michael stood in the doorway, backlit by hallway lights, his expression carved from granite. How long had he been there? How much had he seen? Anger radiated from him in waves, but underneath it something Ruth was learning to recognize: fear, not for himself, for her. The meeting ended early, Michael said, his voice dangerously soft. He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. Lucky for me, unlucky for you. Michael's mind raced through contingencies. She'd read the letter, knew about Vince, understood she was leverage. The smart move was containment, tighter security, restricted access, possibly relocation. But looking at Ruth standing there, caught between defiance and terror, all his tactical thinking dissolved into something more primal. "She's in danger because of me. You shouldn't be here," he said, closing the distance between them. Ruth backed against the desk, trapped. "The less you know, the safer you are." "It's too late for that." Her voice shook but held firm. "Someone inside your organization betrayed you. They know about me, about what I did." She met his eyes. "I'm already part of this, Michael. Pretending otherwise won't protect either of us." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. She was right. The moment she'd stepped in front of that blade, she'd become a piece on the board, and Michael's enemies moved pieces with ruthless efficiency. "Vince," Ruth gestured to the fallen letter. "Who is he?" Michael's jaw clenched. "My second in command. My father's godson. Someone I trusted with my life." The betrayal tasted like acid. Vince had stood beside him at Don Genovese's funeral, had sworn loyalty over the casket. And all the while, he'd been selling information to their enemies. "He wants what I have. The Marino family promised him my position in exchange for delivering me. And me? What do I have to do with that?" Their eyes locked, and Michael saw her putting the pieces together the way his enemies thought, the brutal calculus of leverage and weakness. "You're my conscience," he said quietly. The one thing I've protected instead of eliminating. That makes you a target." The words settled between them like stones. Ruth understood, now truly understood, the gravity of what her act of kindness had set in motion. She'd saved a man at war, and wars didn't pause for innocents. They consumed them. Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the windows. Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "I have to go. Vince just made his move." He looked at Ruth, something desperate flickering behind his control. "Stay here, in this office. Lock the door after I leave. Trust no one until I return." "Michael." "No one, Ruth." He moved to the door, then paused. "If I don't come back by dawn," he trailed off, unable to finish. What could he say? Run? Hide? Pray? "You'll come back," Ruth said, though neither of them knew if she believed it. Michael left, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Motors roared outside, cars departing into the storm. Ruth stood in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his empire, and moved to the window. Lightning illuminated Verona below, a city beautiful and treacherous, hiding wars in its shadows. Somewhere out there, Michael was walking into betrayal, armed only with the knowledge she'd helped him uncover. And somewhere in the penthouse, enemies might already be moving. Ruth pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching rain streak down like tears, and whispered the question that had been building since the moment she'd thrown herself in front of a stranger's blade. "What have I done?" The storm offered no answer, only thunder, rolling like distant gunfire. The days blurred into something neither of them had anticipated, a rhythm that felt dangerously close to domesticity. Dinners became their battlefield and their sanctuary. Michael insisted Ruth eat with him, claiming it was easier than having meals delivered separately. They both knew it was a lie. He craved her presence the way drowning men craved air, though he'd never admit it. She came because the alternative, eating alone in that beautiful prison, felt like surrendering to isolation. The first dinners were combat. Ruth challenged everything. His methods, his morality, the walls he'd built around basic human decency. "You threatened a man's life over money," she said one evening, fork suspended over untouched pasta. "I threatened a man's life over betrayal," Michael corrected. The money was just the evidence. He watched her process this, saw the conflict warring in her eyes. "In my world, Ruth, loyalty is the only currency that matters. Without it, everything collapses." "And what about mercy? Forgiveness?" "Mercy is a luxury I can't afford." He took a measured sip of wine. "Forgiveness is a weakness that gets people killed." She should have hated him for it. Michael could see her wanting to, see her clinging to the moral high ground that had governed her quiet curator's life. But she was too intelligent not to see the logic, brutal as it was, that kept his empire standing. "Your father," Ruth said softly, changing tactics. "When did he die?" Michael's knuckles whitened around his glass. No one asked about Don Genovese. No one dared. But Ruth wasn't asking as an enemy or a subordinate. She was asking as someone who'd seen the photograph in his study, who'd glimpsed the ghost he carried. 9 years ago, he said finally. Car bomb. They wired it to the ignition while he was at Sunday Mass. The irony wasn't lost on him, his father, who'd built an empire on violence, killed while seeking absolution. I was 29, unprepared. But succession in our world doesn't wait for readiness. Ruth heard what he didn't say. I've been alone ever since. The weight of it pressed against her chest. This man who'd inherited a throne built on blood and never had time to grieve the father who'd placed him there. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. Michael met her eyes across the candlelight. He chose this life. I chose to honor it. But his voice carried exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying crowns too heavy for human shoulders. Their dinners slowly transformed. Arguments gave way to questions. Questions became stories. Stories revealed the humans beneath their roles, the curator who'd lost herself in art to escape a chaotic childhood, the king who'd sacrificed everything personal for duty. They were falling, both of them, and neither knew how to stop. Ruth discovered the piano on the 10th day. It stood in the corner of Michael's study, a Steinway grand, black and pristine, looking untouched. She'd walked past it a dozen times before curiosity overcame caution. Her fingers found the keys, tentative at first, then more confident. The melody rose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece her mother had taught her during childhood summers when life was simpler and kindness hadn't yet proven dangerous. Ruth lost herself in the music, in the memories of a woman who'd believed compassion could change the world. She didn't hear Michael enter. He stood in the doorway, frozen by the sound. In the 10 years since Sophia's death, these rooms had known only silence, strategic, controlled, safe. But Ruth's music filled spaces he'd thought permanently hollow, made the air breathe differently. She made his fortress feel like a home. Michael's chest constricted with something he'd thought he'd buried with Sophia longing. Not just physical, though God knew he wanted to touch Ruth with an intensity that frightened him. This was deeper, more dangerous. He longed for the peace she carried, for the way she looked at him and saw a man instead of a monster. Ruth's hands stilled on the keys. She'd felt his presence, the way prey senses predators. But when she turned, Michael's expression held no threat, only something raw and unguarded. "You make the silence sound like peace," he said quietly. The words hung between them, weighted with everything they couldn't say. Ruth stood, and the distance between them felt infinite and non-existent all at once. "Michael." She didn't know how to finish. "This is wrong. This is impossible. This is everything I shouldn't want." He crossed the room in 3 strides, his control finally fracturing. "Tell me to stop." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Tell me this is a mistake." Ruth knew she should. Knew this man was violence wrapped in expensive suits, that loving him meant accepting darkness she'd spent her life avoiding. But standing there, seeing the loneliness that mirrored her own, feeling the tenderness in hands that had killed, she couldn't. "I can't," she whispered. Michael's kiss was everything, and nothing like she'd imagined. Slow, inevitable, achingly careful. He kissed her like she was fragile, like she might shatter under the weight of his need. Ruth's hands found his shirt, pulling him closer, and felt his control slip further. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together. "This is dangerous," Michael said, his voice rough. "Everything I touch destroys. Everyone who gets close." "I know." Ruth's fingers traced the rose tattoo through his shirt. "I know what happened to Sophia. I know the risks. Then you know this ends badly. Probably." She met his eyes, clear-eyed and certain despite the fear. "But I'm already here, Michael. Already part of your war. At least let me choose this." Outside, the city glittered with false promises. Inside, 2 people who shouldn't have met, shouldn't have connected, held each other against the inevitable storm. Love in Michael Genovese's world was a bullet waiting to fire. They kissed anyway. The argument started at 2 in the morning, when shadows ruled the penthouse and Ruth should have been sleeping. But sleep had become impossible since Michael's kiss, her mind replaying the tenderness in his hands, the danger in his eyes, the inevitability of their collision. She'd been reading in bed when voices erupted from down the hall, low, vicious, barely controlled. "You're compromised." Vince Rinaldi's voice carried the sharp edge of accusation. "The girl has made you soft." Ruth froze, book forgotten. The girl. They were talking about her. "Watch your tone," Michael said, his voice deadly calm. "And my personal life is none of your concern. It's my concern when it affects the family." Vince stepped closer to his childhood friend, his Don, the man he'd sworn to protect and decided to destroy. "The Marino know about her. They're planning something. We need to move her out. Use her as bait if necessary." Michael's jaw clenched. "She's not bait. She's under my protection. She's a liability." Vince's control slipped. 20 years of standing in Michael's shadow, of watching lesser men rise while he remained the loyal second, had calcified into bitter resentment. "Your father would have handled this already. He'd have." "My father isn't here." Michael's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "I am, and you'll remember your place." Vince saw it then, the wall that had risen between them since Ruth Robbins entered Michael's fortress. His friend had become his enemy the moment he'd chosen to protect, instead of eliminate. The Marino family's offer echoed in Vince's mind. "Deliver Genovese, take his throne." "I remember exactly where I stand," Vince said coldly, and walked out. Michael stood in the darkened hallway, his instincts screaming warnings his heart refused to hear. Vince's hostility wasn't new, they'd been growing apart for months. But something in his godbrother's eyes tonight felt different, final. He should have acted then, should have followed his father's teachings about preemptive strikes and surgical eliminations. Instead, he went to check on Ruth. She met him in the hallway, her face pale. "I heard." "You shouldn't eavesdrop." Michael reached for her instinctively, then caught himself. Every touch made her more of a target. "Vince knows about me." Ruth's hands trembled. "About us. Michael, what if he..." "He won't." Michael's certainty felt hollow even to himself. Vince is loyal. He's just concerned. He'll calm down. Ruth searched his face, seeing the doubt he tried to hide. "And if he doesn't? Then I'll handle it." He cupped her face, needing this one moment of tenderness before the storm. "Trust me." She wanted to believe his control extended beyond these walls, that loyalty mattered more than ambition. But something in Vince's voice had carried the weight of decisions already made. "Michael." The first window exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Chaos erupted with surgical precision. 4 masked men stormed through the shattered windows, their weapons trained and professional. Not random violence, a coordinated strike. Michael's mind processed the angles, the tactics, the timing, and understood instantly. Inside information. "Get down." He shoved Ruth behind the marble counter, his body shielding hers as bullets chewed through expensive furniture. His hand found the gun holstered at his spine. Always there, always loaded. His father's first lesson. Michael moved like violence incarnate, smooth, silent, lethal. Years of training compressed into instinct. He dropped the first attacker with a headshot, rolled behind a column, and took out the second before the body hit the ground. This was the man Ruth had glimpsed in his office, the killer who'd carved an empire from blood and bone. Ruth pressed herself against the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sounds glass shattering, bullets ricocheting, bodies falling were nothing like movies. They were wet and final and real. She could smell gunpowder and fear, taste copper in the air. Through the chaos, Michael calculated. 4 attackers meant distraction. The real threat would come differently. He was right. Vince appeared in the doorway, backlit by hallway lights, his gun raised and steady, not rushing, not panicking. The stance of someone who'd orchestrated this moment. Michael's world fractured. "Vince, you chose her over the family." Vince's voice carried no regret, only cold certainty. His eyes found Ruth cowering behind the counter. "You turned him weak," he spat at her. "My father told me softness kills kings. I should have moved sooner." Understanding crashed over Michael, every leaked route, every compromised operation, every near miss over the past 6 months. Not the Marino family's intelligence, Vince's betrayal. His godbrother. His father's chosen heir, a parent. The boy he'd grown up with, fought beside, trusted absolutely. Don Genovese would be ashamed, Vince continued, his finger tightening on the trigger. "But I'll fix what you've broken. I'll lead the family properly." Michael fired. The shot was instinct, reflex, 20 years of training overriding emotion. He'd aimed for the shoulder, disabling, not killing. Even betrayed. Some part of him couldn't destroy the brother he'd once loved. The bullet grazed Vince's collarbone, spinning him backward. Blood bloomed across his white shirt, but he was already moving, already running, disappearing into the smoke-filled hallway as sirens wailed in the distance. Michael's men would be flooding the building now. The attack was over. The war had just begun. He turned to Ruth, who'd emerged from behind the counter, her face ashen. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Michael pulled her against his chest, feeling her trembling, and stared at the destruction around them. Shattered glass, spent shells, bodies of men sent to kill him. The penthouse that had been a fortress was now a crime scene. And somewhere in the night, Vince was regrouping, planning, preparing his next move. "It's not over," Ruth whispered against Michael's shirt. "No." He held her tighter, feeling everything he'd built crumbling around them. "It's just beginning." Vince Rinaldi returned 2 hours later with hell at his back. The first sign was smoke, acrid, chemical, rising from the parking levels below. Michael smelled it before the alarms triggered, his instincts honed by years of survival, screaming warnings. He was on his feet instantly, weapon drawn, moving toward Ruth's room. She met him in the hallway, already dressed, her eyes wide but steady. "What's happening?" "Vince." The name tasted like poison. "He's not finished." Explosions rocked the building's foundation. Systematic, strategic. Vince had always been tactical. He'd learned from Don Genovese himself. Now he was using those lessons to destroy everything the old man had built. Fire suppression systems failed. Emergency lighting flickered. The fortress was becoming a tomb. Michael's phone erupted with reports from his men stationed throughout the building. "Sir, multiple breaches, lobby, service entrance, parking structure. At least 15 hostiles. They're coming up. 15 men, professional, armed, coming for his throne and the woman beside him. Evacuate all civilians," Michael ordered. "Lock down floors 3 through 10. Fall back to the penthouse. We make our stand here." He turned to Ruth, his expression carved from granite. There's a panic room behind my study. Reinforced steel, independent air supply, communication equipment. You'll go there. Now. Ruth's jaw set in a way he'd learned meant defiance. No. This isn't a negotiation. Michael grabbed her shoulders, his fear manifesting as anger. In his mind, he saw Sophia's car engulfed in flames, saw Ruth's body broken the same way. History repeating with surgical precision. You'll go to the panic room and you'll stay there until... Until what? Ruth's voice cut through his control. Until you're dead? Until Vince wins? I'm already part of this, Michael. I'm not hiding while you fight my battle. It's not your battle. It became mine the moment I threw myself in front of that knife. Her hands fisted in his shirt. You don't get to protect me by dying alone. Their eyes locked, both understanding the truth. Separated, they were vulnerable. Together they had a chance. Slim, desperate, but present. The building shuddered. Closer now. Stay behind me, Michael said finally. Do exactly what I say. And Ruth... His hand cupped her face. If I tell you to run, you run. She didn't promise. Neither of them expected her to. Vince's men breached the penthouse with military precision flash grenades, suppressing fire, coordinated entry points. Michael's loyal soldiers met them with equal violence. The pristine space transformed into a war-zone marble, cracking under bullets, art shattering, blood pooling on designer floors. Michael fought with cold efficiency, each shot calculated, each movement economical. This was what Don Genovese had raised him for, to stand at the center of chaos and impose order through superior violence. He dropped 3 attackers, reloaded, dropped 2 more. But they kept coming. Ruth pressed against the wall, watching Michael move like death incarnate. This was the man she'd saved, both guardian and destroyer, tender and terrible. She understood now why men feared him, why power consolidated in his hands. He wasn't just willing to kill, he was good at it. Smoke filled the penthouse as fire climbed from below. Through the haze, a figure emerged larger than the others, moving with authority. The masked man grabbed Ruth before she could react, his arm locking around her throat, something cold and sharp pressing against her ribs. A knife. Michael's head snapped toward them, his gun tracking, but the angle was wrong. The hostage situation every operator dreaded, clear shot impossible, collateral damage guaranteed. Drop it, Genovese, the man said, pulling his mask away. Not one of Vince's soldiers, Vince himself. Blood soaked through his shirt from Michael's earlier shot, but adrenaline and ambition kept him standing. His face was twisted with rage and triumph, the expression of a man who'd gambled everything on one final play. The girl who saved you dies saving you again. Vince sneered. The knife, Ruth recognized it with sick certainty. The same blade that had carved through her abdomen on that rain. Soaked street pressing harder. Poetic, really. Drop the gun or I open her throat. Michael's mind fractured into combat mathematics. Distance. 12 feet. Clear shot. None. Ruth's survival rate if he fired. 20%. His own survival if he surrendered. 0. The family's future, if Vince won. Extinction. Sophia died because I failed to act fast enough. But Ruth wasn't Sophia. Sophia had been gentle, passive, content to be protected. Ruth's eyes met his across the smoke, and he saw calculation there, not fear, but planning. She was waiting for an opening. Michael lowered his weapon slowly, appearing to surrender. Let her go. This is between us. Everything's between us now. Vince's attention fixed on Michael, his childhood friend, his rival, his target. Your father should have chosen me. I was always stronger, always willing to do what needed. Ruth moved. Her elbow drove into Vince's wounded shoulder, the spot where Michael's bullet had torn through. Vince's grip loosened, the knife pulling away from her ribs. Ruth twisted, grabbed a fallen blade from the floor, another attacker's weapon, and drove it upward into Vince's side with every ounce of strength her curator's hands possessed. Not the same knife he'd held, but close enough, symbolic enough. Vince's eyes went wide with shock and betrayal. Michael's shot came half a second later, center mass. Professional, final. Vince crumpled, blood spreading across marble floors that had once hosted his family's Sunday dinners. The shooting stopped. Vince's remaining men fled or surrendered. Sirens wailed closer. Rain poured through shattered windows as Ruth and Michael stood together in the wreckage, smoke curling around them, fire reflecting in their eyes, the city burning beyond the glass. Ruth's hands shook as adrenaline crashed. Michael pulled her against him, both their hearts racing, both covered in ash and blood. "It's over," she whispered. "Yes." Michael held her tighter, feeling the weight of empire and loss. "It's over." Morning arrived without fanfare, just pale light filtering through shattered windows, turning broken glass into scattered diamonds across blood-stained marble. The war was over. Vince Rinaldi's body had been removed hours ago, taken by Michael's cleanup crew to a destination Ruth didn't ask about. The Marino family's leadership had surrendered by dawn, their operation dismantled, their ambitions buried with their failed coup. Police had been paid, witnesses relocated, evidence sanitized. The machinery of Michael's empire moved with efficient brutality, erasing the night's chaos as though it had never happened. But it had happened. The scorch marks on the walls testified. The empty spaces where art once hung bore witness. And the two people sitting in Michael's office, wrapped in ash and exhaustion, would carry the scars forever. Ruth sat in his leather chair, drowning in his jacket. It smelled like gunpowder and expensive cologne, like violence and safety intertwined. She'd insisted Michael shower first, tend to his wounds. He'd argued. She'd won. Small victory in a night of impossible choices. Now he stood by the window, showered and dressed in fresh clothes, staring at Verona's skyline as emergency vehicles departed below. From outside, the building looked pristine, just another luxury high-rise housing the city's elite. No one would know a war had been fought in its upper floors. Michael's mind circled the same calculation he'd been running since Vince fell. Exit strategy. Ruth deserved escape from his world, from the violence that would inevitably return. There would always be another Vince, another rival, another threat. Keeping her meant sentencing her to a life of looking over her shoulder. Loving her meant letting her go. The thought carved hollowness through his chest, the same hollow that had lived there since Sophia, that Ruth had somehow filled without permission. But his feelings were irrelevant. Her safety mattered more. "I've made arrangements," Michael said, his voice rough from smoke and shouting. "New identity, financial security, relocation to wherever you choose. Vienna has excellent art museums, or Paris, if you prefer, somewhere far from this city and everything in it." Ruth's hands tightened on the jacket. She'd known this moment would come, the offer of freedom, the escape hatch every rational part of her should take. 2 weeks ago, she would have fled without hesitation. But that was before she'd seen behind his armor, before she'd understood that monsters were just men who'd survived too much. "You're sending me away," she said quietly. "I'm giving you peace." Michael turned to face her, his expression carefully controlled. "You deserve a life without bodyguards and bulletproof cars. Without wondering if every stranger carries a grudge against your..." He stopped, the word catching. "Lover? Partner? Captor?" None fit what they'd become. "Against my what, Michael?" Their eyes met across the demolished office. Michael saw Ruth cataloging his micro-expressions the way she once studied Renaissance paintings, searching for truth beneath the surface. She'd learned to read him, this woman who'd disrupted his empire with kindness. "Against the man you saved," he finished carefully. Ruth stood, his jacket falling away, revealing the bandage still wrapped around her torso, permanent reminder of the moment everything changed. She crossed to him slowly. Each step deliberates. "Peace isn't peace without meaning," she said. "I learned that from a man who holds an empire together through loyalty and fear, who bandaged my wound with hands that have killed, who plays judge and executioner but listens to Chopin in empty rooms." Michael's jaw clenched. "You're romanticizing survival, Ruth. What happened was proximity and adrenaline. In 6 months, you'll resent me for trapping you here." "You're not trapping me." Her hand found his chest, fingertips tracing the rose tattoo through his shirt, Sophia's memorial, now witness to something new. "I'm choosing." The touch undid him. Michael caught her wrist, not pulling away but holding on, drowning man finding shore. "You don't understand what you're choosing. This life, my life, it's dangerous. There will always be another Vince, another war. People I care about become targets." "I know." Ruth's other hand cupped his face, feeling the exhaustion carved there. "I've seen what happens to people you love. But Michael, I'm already a target. Leaving doesn't change that. Your enemies know about me now. They'll always know." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. By trying to protect her, he'd made her vulnerable. There was no reset button, no returning to the quiet curator's life she'd lost the moment she'd thrown herself in front of that blade. "Then teach me," Ruth whispered, stepping closer until their bodies touched. "Teach me how to survive in your world, how to stand beside you instead of behind you, how to be more than just the girl you saved." Michael's control fractured completely, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him with desperate intensity. Staying means living in danger. Then teach me how to survive it. Her voice was soft but steel, reinforced. Because I'm not running from the first real thing I've felt in years. Not from you. They stood together as dawn painted the ruined office gold, two souls scarred by violence, bound by impossible choices, holding each other against the certainty of future storms. Michael pressed his forehead to hers, feeling the shift in his universe. This changes everything. Good, Ruth said. Everything needed changing. Ruth Robbins's act of saving a stranger became the act that redefined her life. What began as instinct, a moment of selfless courage on rain-soaked pavement, had evolved into something neither science nor strategy could explain. She'd entered Michael's world by accident but stayed by choice, proving that even the most fortified hearts could be breached by compassion. Michael Genovese's world of violence gained its first glimpse of humanity in years. The man who'd ruled through fear and precision discovered that strength could exist alongside vulnerability, that protecting something precious didn't make him weak, it made him human. Together they stood as proof that even in the underworld's darkest corners, compassion could spark revolution, that love could grow from ruin, that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the most necessary one. Their story didn't end with peace. It began with understanding forged in blood, tested by loyalty, and sealed by an impossible love that refused to die. And that's where today's story ends. If this touched your heart, or made you think a little deeper about life, love, or choices, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every message, and they mean more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and keep believing in better days.